you a variety of layouts with respect to poster design. Because the poster layout, meaning the sequencing of information, should visually map to the logical flow of the story. And sometimes those two things are not aligned as well as viewers might like. So let's look at some examples. I just mentioned that they need to map to one another very clearly, the visual and the logical argument you're making, and then think about space, right? In most cases at a research poster session, the majority of the space is going to be allocated to results if you have results to show to support the claims you're making. But let's say that your primary project is really about developing a new method. In that case, you might allocate a significant amount of space on the poster to explaining the method because you hope that people visiting take it up. And you might just have a few results that validate it, right? So you think about allocating space appropriately for the focus of the message you want to present. You recognize this, I'm sure, the 3-column vertical flow for a poster design. This is how it might look on this is an actual poster for material science. You'll notice that in this case, the center column is much wider than the side columns. Something that's particularly attractive about this poster is the quality of the images, which I think is really exceptionally good, and the use of highlighting. But 3-column is really common. Many people just kind of go to that by default. And that's not a good thing to do in many cases, like this one, because here you can see that the results start down in the bottom of this middle column and they continue in the top furthest right column. That's not good design. And, you know, there's no heading up there at the top to tell you that that's still results. I mean, we can figure that out. But as viewers, we shouldn't have to figure stuff like that out if a poster is designed really well. So think about other options. Like this is one kind of layout that you may want to experiment with, where you can potentially get the motivation, problem, and background down this column, and then expand that out and either devote a large space on the top right to method, your solution, or to results. Centered image is another possibility. This is a really beautiful bioinformatics poster that I worked with on this summer with a student. Really beautifully done, especially notice the good headings on this poster, informative headings. Sometimes individuals will find that horizontal rows work well. So here we have 2 horizontal rows that flow left to right. This is a vertical oriented poster, but we still have horizontal rows. Very clever use of partitioning, right? It's about ecology and bird studies. And so they have this, what looks to appear branches as they're partitioning. Just a clever design element. And then 2 fields in contrast. This is my last example. This is much less common. I have one example of this. This is a computer science poster. On the left side, basically have a case study of a county where there were some voter discrepancies in an election. So this is just laying out all the problems with the vote tallies. And then on the right, they've presented the solution. So the key takeaway here is that you might experiment with the 3-column first, but think about other possibilities as potentially being better layouts for your argument. And then key design principles. Okay, so I would urge you not to put a huge block abstract in the top left corner or a big chunk of background as a monolithic paragraph. It is honestly, as a viewer, it's really off-putting and it's impossible to read. You cannot stand easily 5 feet from something and track lines that are that small and that close together. Like really don't burn that precious territory on an abstract. I'll come back later. We can talk about how you can share your abstract with viewers, with visitors, but don't plop it on your poster. Here we have an example on the left where this was a draft poster and I refer to it as just a wall of words. I mean, I know there's some images there, figures, but really what I notice is like, wow, there's a lot of small text on that poster. So the person reworked it, and you can see that now the figures are much more prominent in the second draft. Really edit aggressively so that you don't have full sentences or long text strings for people to read. Really try to communicate the key points in as few words as possible. If you put together bulleted lists, try to make them parallel in structure, because that aids scanning. People can scan lists that start, for example, if you start one bullet with a verb, do your best to start as many of the items in the list as possible with a verb. We recommend sans serif fonts for posters and for slides. And the reason for that is mainly that if you look at that E on the right, you'll notice the shaft for the letter is uniform, right? Uniform in thickness. And a serif font, like the one you see on the left, there's thin parts and thick parts to letters. And studies have been done that show that when people are reading text from a distance, that the thin parts of serif fonts start to disappear from view, making them harder to read. This is great for papers that you publish, because there you're reading like 10, 12 inches from your face, and the tails of a serif actually draw your eye across the line. So it's very well suited for reading up close, but not from far away. These are some recommendations about font sizes. For a title, try not to go below like 90 points. And you may need to think about how to craft your title in such a way that you use different words than the words, for example, that maybe you used in your paper's title. Because paper titles tend to be long and include a lot of compound nouns. But for the poster title, your goal is to get people to come talk to you. So think about how to write a title that's still accurate and professional, but draws people in without, 2 long lines of text that you have to put as a title in 36-point font, because that's the only way you can make it fit. So think hard about your titles. I pulled this column of text from a poster because it has a lot of the common problems in the ways that people present text in visual formats, whether it's slides or posters. So one thing that needs revision is that they didn't use a hanging indent. So a hanging indent, I assume many of you know what that is, but if you see that W in within in the second line, hanging indent would push that W under the W in women, right? So it'd be a clean line. Again, this helps with reading fast. Second issue is that they have used right-left justification, which means that it's created all these weird spaces between the words, like unusually large gaps in some spots. Again, reduces legibility. Another challenge here is that the line spacing between each line is the same. Like the gap between this line is the same as the gap between these 2 bullets. You want to chunk related text, right? So pull related lines closer together, a little more white space between unrelated elements, so that visually there's some partitioning going on there. Not huge gaps, but just enough to be evident. And then last, they're right on the margin in this section, right? As you see the A in admissions, it's right up against that blue line. You want to have a little bit more generous margins or white space around your figures and text so that things don't feel quite so crowded. Avoid special treatments like shadow text or outline text. It's really hard to read. In this particular example, there's a lot of underlining. Think about other text treatments besides underlining for emphasis, because underlining, it has descenders. If you look at the T in testing at this center heading testing and results, when you use underlining, right, the line usually intersects with the descenders of letters, like the G in testing, again, reduces legibility. There's too many boxes. Now, I know you're not designing posters that look about like big, like oil storage tanks, but the takeaway here is it's just too many sections. it's not just that they're boxes. And notice how many boxes are within boxes, right? We have cells and tables that are boxes. Many of their units look like boxes, right? It's just a lot of boxes. But the key thing here is that it's also way too many sections. So that it makes it hard to know. Like you're up here, you're like, okay, I think I'm supposed to read down here, but I get over here and now like here. Think about cueing people to the flow and fewer sections. Ideally, you want to avoid these kinds of legends or keys by, if you have pieces of equipment you're highlighting in a pipeline, for example, if you're doing some kind of machine learning pipeline, label the components in close proximity instead of creating a key. I say like not so many arrows. Like if you are having to use arrows to identify particular features in your data or aspects of components, try not to use arrowheads. Like it's just use a line and use a thin line, not a thick line, and definitely not a red arrow. Unless red is the only, like if red is the color that pops in terms of contrast, then you can use red, but think carefully about the thickness of that line. Because what happens here is people focus on the arrows. They don't focus on the components. Oh, one other thing, I might as well mention this in case you use arrows. Something I also see people do sometimes is they turn the arrows the other way. So roller skate wheel, the words, this arrow is flipped. So it points from here to here. You're sending your people's eyes away from your device, in this case, not smart, right? So if you use arrows, they should be directed towards the image. Insets can be useful to zoom in on particular features, whether that's in a graph or in some kind of component for a device. And then this is the last slide I have around principles of design. In this example on the left, we have this text in the center that I highlighted in the red outlining, where we have two results. And because I know what a blot is, right? I know which one maps to the blot. But it could create some confusion for somebody who doesn't know what a blot is. And as a designer, you want to make things as easy as possible. And a simple thing like a small triangle can easily help somebody navigate the mapping of the result in words to the appropriate figure. Any questions for me so far? Talked about layout, talked about some design principles. Okay, so I'm gonna put up some advice around color. This is something to avoid at all costs. I call this the rainbow effect. It's more common than you might think. I did not make this up. I pulled this straight off a publicly accessible website. Some combinations that are common but do not work well. Do not put red or fuchsia on royal blue. Don't put black on blue or purple and black together. None of these work well. It looks okay typically when you're designing on your computer. Again, because maybe the computer's really bright, but when you go to print it out, the contrast is usually lost. I mean, look at these equations over here, right? And they'd be impossible to read. I've got a couple of embedded links. If you are not very familiar with choosing palettes, there are so many palette pickers that are free. You can just like choose one of your favorite colors, a color that you like to use maybe in your presentations, and it will provide you with a full complement of colors that look nice with that particular color that you'd like to use. This is a pretty good looking palette. Gradients should be avoided because it's really hard to find a text color that works across a gradient. Avoid cluttered backgrounds. Notice what they chose to highlight. Right? They changed the color. Our eyes are drawn to contrast, right? This is the only gold box on the poster, but they used it for the references. So it's not a great design decision, right? Because you're drawing somebody's eyes, they recognize difference, they investigate, it's like, references, not the thing that I most care about as a viewer, perhaps. This is very subtle and nicely designed use of color. So the thing that you might not notice is that over here on the bottom right, there's this algorithm roadmap that's color coded. And the designer of this poster used that coloring for different parts of the poster. So there's a really nice color coherence in the way that this person approached the color choices. You lose when you design a poster like this. It is better to choose some really important results and display them well so that people remember them than to try to crowd all of your data onto a poster. Remember the story, if you print a poster that's 48 by 36 on a sheet of 8.5 by 11, you should be able to read everything pretty easily. Like you should be able to tape that piece of paper to a wall and stand 4 feet back and read it, even the captions on your figures. Now some of these from MD Anderson, which I took, these are huge posters. Like I'm guessing that these are like 6 feet horizontally. So the scale here is maybe a little bit even smaller than normal, but if you cannot read text that's printed out from 4 feet away, you need to go in and adjust the font size. Right, so the key takeaways here are really think about posters from the perspective of the viewer, because you know that you can tell that these individuals, they put time into designing these posters. So I don't mean to stand up here and just diss on all the hard work they did, but they have not carefully designed for the situation of a poster session. When they put too much material on the poster that's too dense, that requires them to go to small fonts, then it's not a great product. There are a couple of other things on the bingo sheet that I want to just mention quickly before we talk about delivering a poster. You notice that I wrote in the bottom left corner, conclusions, but not value. This is probably the #1 problem I see in poster presentations, both the posters themselves and the verbal presentation of the poster. Individuals will summarize the key points of the poster, but they forget to add those 1 or 2 extra sentences about the value that the work adds, like the implications, the value, what it means. You can get there by tying back to the motivation sometimes, like you know this, right? But people often just sort of drop off on summary and miss that important opportunity. So that's why that's on this sheet. The other one I want to point out is in the top row, long list of future work equals slackers. Obviously, research, there's always a long list of things to be done. So I'm just being facetious there, right? I'm not saying that people are slackers, but the impression that viewers will have if you have a list of 6 items of future work is that, wow, this work is really, there's a lot to do here. Like, think strategically. Include the 3 most important things that represent next steps, not your laundry list of things that keeps you up at night, okay? Just pick 3, not a long list. Any questions for me? We're about to transition to delivering a poster for the last 12 minutes. All right. Okay, so, who would you want to talk to? Right? I'm just putting it, remember, you're competing for people's interest and attention. Your poster is going to draw them in, but you are part of that package. So I'm not saying that you need to like fake it and oversell, but you need to at least appear approachable and like you want to talk about your research. So just keep that in mind in terms of, this person over on the right, he's standing even behind the poster. It really doesn't seem like he wants to be there. So show that you're in, yes, I noticed, yes, in the pocket, that expression just does not seem enthused. When you're presenting your poster, do your best, and this is challenging, to keep your back to the poster and turn your head. What often happens in poster sessions is people come up, imagine this is my poster. I've welcomed you, you're ready to talk to me. We get into it, right? So all of a sudden I pivot right? Just like this person. And I start showing you stuff and you're right next to me. And guess what? I have my back turned to everybody who's walking by. Vicky might have walked by, but do you think she's going to like stop? No, she's not going to stop if you and I are in conversation with our backs to the passersby. This is small and subtle, but it makes a difference. I want you to try as best you can to keep your back and turn your head. I could easily explain things to you by going like this instead of going like this. Very subtle. It's important. This even applies when you're presenting figures in a talk. Like, I want you to resist pivoting. Stand facing forward like you see there. Eye contact is important for North American culture in terms of establishing trust. So you don't want to just stare, read from your poster. When people are walking by, you should not avoid making eye contact. They might be trying to avoid making eye contact with you. Push back, look at them. Gestures are important, especially because poster sessions get really noisy, right? It's super loud. And sometimes it's hard for people to hear you. So you can reinforce the verbal channel by using your hands on the visual channel. And when you go to point at your poster, point with precision. Use your poster as a prop. So many times people memorize their poster spiel and they stand like 3 feet out and they're just like, brr. And the poster's just like floating in the background. They have no connection to it at all. But even if you are connected to the poster, I'm too short to really explain, to demonstrate this well, but imagine that this is my data section and I have 3 beautiful figures right here. And I'm talking to Jared and I say, as you can see in the figure, and I have this like vague gesture towards my 3 figures. Jared, if he's like, right, he has to do extra work to figure out which one I'm talking about. So use either precise gestures like this figure and point, or you have to remember to use the verbal cues, right? In figure 3, so that he doesn't have to burn like extra cognitive cycles trying to figure out where I am on the poster. Speak to be heard. How do you do that? A couple of things. One, really hydrate in advance. I know you're thinking like, wow, poster session, I have to stand there 2 hours. That doesn't seem like a good idea, but you want to really hydrate in advance. Use your diaphragm to project your voice, not just your chest voice. If people are having trouble hearing you, people have different comfort zones around proximity, like how close they want to stand next to someone. It can be useful sometimes. If you have someone next to you as a lot of people and they're talking really loud, to just say to your poster visitor, like, why don't we step up to the side here? And I don't mean down the hall. I just mean like step a few feet back. I recommend that you print a copy of your poster, small, that you can hold in your hand, so that if somebody is standing next to you, you can use it literally to talk them through the poster while they're standing next to you if there's too much going on in your space. It's just an extra thing you can have on hand that can be useful. You have to adjust the rate, of course, of your voice in terms of the pace at which you're speaking. The general rule is that you slow down for the key points, obviously to pause so that people can take them in, and you speed up during the details. That's just a general rule. If somebody shows a lot of interest in the details of your method or a figure, then you slow down, you back up, you give them a chance to ask questions. Remember that it's a conversation. So don't just talk at someone for like 3.5 minutes, trying to hold them and keep them from asking their questions and interrupting you. Like, pause occasionally to give them a chance to direct the narrative. They will leave much more satisfied, and you will not have to say as much. And show your spark. By that, I just mean like bring your enthusiasm and your passion for what you do to the interaction. Because if you're standing there looking glum, like that person we saw on that first slide, nobody's going to bring the energy to you as the presenter. They want to build on your You put a ton of work into research. All of you were just talking about how you're spending all weekend either in lab or sleeping because you spent all week in lab. Like, I know how much I did not do lab work in my PhD, but I remember what it is like. It's rough. And so in this moment, when you are having the chance to present what you've accomplished to others, really try to enjoy that and show it. Okay, so we only have 5 minutes left, but that's great because I told you at the outset that we would model or role play just a couple of different situations that you encounter. Like, look at this picture. This says it all, right? So we have a poster presenter in this shirt, in the red shirt. He's looking sort of kind of out into space because he doesn't want to make these two people feel uncomfortable. And these two individuals are actively looking at the poster and not making eye contact with him. Tell me you have not experienced this at a poster session. This is so common, right? It is so common. What should this person do? What would you recommend that that person do? Absolutely. Like, you give people their moment to like look at your poster to sort of ground themselves. But yeah, approach them. What are some things you've said? Many of you have done poster sessions. What do you say to engage people, approach people? Just some phrases. Right. Yeah, who wants to read a whole poster standing there while two people stare at you? No one. Okay, so that was framed as a yes/no question. How might you phrase that? How might she phrase that or phrase a different expression so that it doesn't come out like a yes/no? Ah, that's clever. What do you think so far? Which parts of the work interest you most? Right, so you can give them that option up front. Yeah, would you like me to just quickly summarize the key points for you? What you said before you ask if they have questions, one way to phrase that a little bit differently is, what questions do you have for me? Right? I'm implying that they have questions. They might say, oh, I don't have any. But instead of saying, if you have any, say, what questions do you have for me? Because usually they'll come up with one. Right? These are small, subtle things, but think about how you initiate interaction with someone. Then we have the catch-up newcomer option. Like, this isn't as complicated as it seems. In the moment, though, it's typically pretty awkward. What do you do? So imagine that I'm here explaining my poster to Vicky and someone walks up. What should I do in that moment? How do I keep Vicky with me and bring in someone new? What's the right thing to do in that situation? What's one right thing to do? There are many. Right, so the key thing that I'm hearing from you, I think, is that you acknowledge the person has come up, and you keep going, and then you ask them as you finish up with the first person, like, do you want me to fill you in on the background or kind of catch you up, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's what you want to do. Sometimes you can acknowledge someone's presence with just a nod, but you should do that. Like, don't pretend like the person didn't show up. Like, look at them, flash them, just an eyebrow raise, like, or a smile, like something, just a nod. And they're like, okay, she sees me. Then what you want to do is you want to say something that clearly signals where you are in the poster to help them know where to look. Whether that's, I was just explaining the method, for example, or to point and keep talking as you were, but just some cue so that they don't stand there like, where are they in the story? Okay, so send some cues. And then, Have any of you ever been in this situation where somebody wanders up to your poster, they survey it for a couple minutes, and then they're like, hey, what's going on right here? And they pick some outlier in your data set or something. Okay, so what do you do in that moment? I've just asked the question, boom, yeah. Okay, backtrack to the beginning. Answer first though. Okay, so don't just avoid the question or like ignore it. Oh, you meant to start them from the beginning. When that works, that's great. Like, I mean, yeah, of course it works. I didn't mean that it didn't work. It does work. But sometimes people will not be that patient. In which case, you want to give them just a quick answer to that first question and then say, then tie it to the beginning. What motivates this is, and then like as a segue, if they seem really impatient and kind of frustrated, that you don't answer their question up front. That's the same thing that happens in a talk, right? If you're giving a talk and somebody has a question, if you just say, I'll get to that. I mean, sometimes we do that, but ideally you give them a quick answer and you say, and I'll explain more later, just to kind of put them, to help them move forward in their thinking about their project and not have them sitting there stewing about how you didn't answer their question. And then the last one is adjusting your pitch on the fly. And that is when, for example, you're talking to someone and they appear bored or they start looking over your shoulder. It happens, especially if you're managing a couple of different people at the same time and somebody seems in and then the other person's sort of fidgety, ready to move on, but they have a question that they want to ask you. So they're not leaving. When you see that happening, then you want to think about the rate and you want to think about kind of jumping high-level key points to kind of move a little bit faster through the story. Because the person whose interest you're holding is going to stick around and ask questions. So on the fly, you have to make adjustments in poster sessions all the time. All the time. So we have covered a lot of ground today, but the key takeaways from today is where we started, and that is going forward, when you're designing your posters, number one, right, really think of the poster as just a visual abstract. It is not a mini version of the paper that you wrote. It is a visual abstract. And abstracts have usually 200 words, 250. Think really trying to restrict the number of words that you're using and to fill in verbally as much as possible. But also practice your poster, presenting your poster out loud, and practice these uncomfortable like interactions that sometimes occur, because having the fluency that you need to make those adjustments comes from voicing your work out loud, not just memorizing a script in your head, but just getting comfortable talking about it. And that's where we started. We talked about, wow, what are the values of poster sessions? Well, one of the key things is getting in conversation in a lower stakes kind of moment, right? You're not up on a raised stage in front of 300 people. It's just you and a couple of people getting acquainted and talking about your work. And it's a great way to start fielding challenging questions and to really think about how you can give very different levels of depth and length discussions of your work that accommodate different people's needs and expectations. So I know that many of you have designed posters before. I hope that you found this useful. And as you prepare your posters for the symposium, if there's something that I can do to be of help, don't hesitate to contact me, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, thanks for noticing, Jared.